Have you ever met someone who lights up a room the second they enter it? Someone so magnetic, so emotionally alive, so dazzling. You almost feel hypnotized. But behind that charm, behind the laughter, behind the carefully staged performance, there's something else. A quiet desperation, a fear of being unseen, unheard, unloved. This is BrainTrap TV. And today, we're not just talking about personality. We're stepping into a survival strategy disguised as sparkle. We're exploring the emotional engine behind the drama, the smiles, the stories, and the emptiness underneath. This is the story of histrionic personality disorder. And it's not what you think. People assume it's about being loud, flashy, flirtatious. But what if it's not about vanity at all? What if it's about a little girl who learned that big emotions were the only way to get someone to stay? A boy who realized that if he wasn't entertaining, he was invisible? That's where it begins. In the places we don't look. In the emotional soil of childhood, where love was inconsistent, where attention was rare, and where the only way to be safe was to be seen. So the performance begins. They become whoever they need to be. The star of the story, the victim of the pain, the flirt, the hero, the emotional center of every room. Because silence is terrifying. It feels like erasure. So they fill it with words, with laughter, with intensity. It's not manipulation. It's survival. Because to a person with HPD, attention isn't just validation. It's oxygen. But the world doesn't see that. It sees too much. It sees drama. It sees someone who's fake, when in reality, they're feeling everything too deeply. Their emotions move fast, too fast to catch. They love hard, hurt quickly, and bounce back like nothing happened, at least on the outside. But inside, they're exhausted, living for reactions, spinning stories, chasing love in places where it was never real. And when they don't get it, when the spotlight moves, panic sets in. They'll raise the stakes, exaggerate, create a crisis, not because they want to hurt anyone, but because being forgotten is a kind of death. The roots of this disorder go deep. It often starts with inconsistent caregiving, a parent who only paid attention during outbursts, a household where emotions were currency, traded, weaponized, ignored. And so the child learns, if I want to be loved, I have to perform. So they do, for years. And it works, until it doesn't. Until their relationships feel shallow. Until they realize people love the show, but not the person. Until they confuse real intimacy with admiration. Because they've never learned the difference. So they become addicted to approval, to being the favorite, the center, the one who matters most. And when they're not, they don't know who they are. That's the terrifying part. Identity becomes a costume. Who do you want me to be? The fun one? The sexy one? The broken one? They shift, adapt, seduce, cry, charm. Because deep down, they're afraid there's nothing underneath. Just emptiness. Just a person who was never taught they were enough without applause. But here's the thing. People with HPD aren't cruel. They're not selfish. They're not broken. They're just scared. Scared that love is temporary. That attention is conditional. That if they stop performing, they'll disappear. And maybe that fear isn't so irrational after all, because many of them did disappear in childhood, ignored, shamed, abandoned, and now they're just trying to make sure that never happens again. So they live in high gear, every interaction turned up to 11, because quiet feels like death, and being boring, unforgivable. But eventually, it catches up. The charm wears thin. The relationships crack. People get tired of the performance, and that's when the person with HPD feels it. The terror of being seen for who they really are and still being left. That's the wound. And it's not a wound that can be fixed with attention, only with truth. And we're just getting started. This is just the beginning of the story. The lights haven't dimmed yet, but the truth is coming. And with it, the chance to finally step off the stage. This is BrainTrap TV, and we're not here to judge. We're here to understand. They don't know they're doing it. Not always. They walk into a room and the energy shifts, like a magnet was turned on. They smile a little too wide. Their stories lean dramatic. Every eye feels like a mirror they need to look good in. But here's what no one tells you. They're not trying to manipulate. They're trying to survive. People with histrionic personality disorder don't plan their emotional intensity. They become it. Fully. Unfiltered. Immediate. And to the outside world, it can feel like a performance. Too much. Too fast, too loud, but inside, it's real. It's just fragile. The emotion burns hot, but doesn't last. They can cry and laugh in the same breath, fall in love in a glance, scream, then forget what it was even about. This isn't moodiness. It's identity slipping. It's emotion flooding a nervous system that never learned regulation. They feel deeply, but not always consistently. They believe what they say in the moment, but the moment moves fast, and the words change. This inconsistency wrecks relationships, because people don't understand how someone can feel so intensely and then seem to move on so quickly. It feels fake, but it's not. It's fast-burning fuel. That's how their emotional engine works. They weren't taught to pause. They were taught to react, to cry louder if no one looked, to laugh harder if the room was quiet. And now, they've built their whole lives on that formula. So relationships become theaters. Intense, passionate, immediate, but often shallow underneath. They fall hard, idealize fast, declare love after a second date. But when conflict comes, when real emotional weight sets in, they panic. Because sustaining love isn't exciting. It's slow, stable, unpredictable in a quiet way. And quiet feels like abandonment. So they escalate. Jealousy, flirtation, manipulation, not to harm, to wake up the relationship again, to feel something, to feel seen. But the very intensity they use to keep people close pushes them away, and that creates the cycle, craving intimacy, but fearing what real vulnerability might cost. They'll say what they think you want to hear. They'll mirror your interests, adopt your emotions, and you'll feel so connected until you realize you don't really know them. Not because they're hiding, but because they don't know themselves beneath the approval. Their identity is a projection screen, reflecting back what they think will keep them safe. But it's exhausting, pretending, adjusting, reperforming the role that got applause yesterday, hoping it still works today. And when it doesn't, they crash hard. They spiral into shame, or distraction, or a new relationship. Anything to not sit with the silence. Because silence whispers the thing they fear most. That they were never loved, only watched. And maybe those aren't the same. Some begin to notice this. After a string of failed relationships. After friends stop returning calls. After someone they cared about finally says, "I can't do this anymore." And in those moments, the mask cracks. The person underneath is still there, still scared, still reaching, but they don't know how to come forward without the act. Because the act is their safety net, and letting it go feels like jumping without a parachute. This is why many with HPD struggle in therapy, because therapy asks you to slow down, to look inward, to tell the truth even when no one's clapping. But they've spent years avoiding that mirror, because when they look into it, they're not sure who's staring back. And that's where the real work begins. It's not about changing how they express themselves. It's about finding the self they never got to become. The one who didn't need to be the star. The one who could be quiet and still be loved. That journey isn't fast, and it isn't pretty. It's scary, but it's possible. Because behind the dramatics, behind the emotional floods, behind the stories, is a heart that's just tired of performing. And maybe, just maybe, ready to be real. This is BrainTrap TV, and the curtain hasn't fallen yet. We're just getting to the truth. It always starts earlier than anyone realizes. Not in adulthood, not in adolescence. It starts in childhood, long before the diagnosis, long before the spotlight, long before anyone gave it a name. Imagine growing up in a home where emotions were currency, where love was conditional, where attention was inconsistent, where the only way to matter was to stand out. That's not drama, that's trauma. And for the child who becomes histrionic, that's where it all begins. They don't seek attention because they're selfish. They seek it because they were once invisible, because being invisible hurt more than anything else. So they found a way to be seen. They became the entertainer, the peacemaker, the one who made everyone laugh, the one who turned pain into performance. And people clapped, so they kept doing it. But no one ever asked why. No one asked if they were okay, if the smile was real, if the tears were exhaustion instead of emotion. Because they looked fine, happy, loud, engaged. But inside, they were collapsing. The root of histrionic personality disorder is rarely about ego. It's about survival. It's about learning, very early, that approval equals safety. That love has to be earned, not received. That silence means abandonment. So they filled the silence. With stories, with charm, with chaos, if necessary. Because chaos is still connection. But what happens when that pattern never breaks? When that child becomes an adult, still performing, it turns into confusion. Relationships that burn fast and crash hard. Self-worth that changes based on who's watching. A sense of self that feels like it's always wearing makeup, even when alone. And when no one's watching, they don't know who they are. Because identity, for someone with HPD, is a reaction, not a discovery, not a choice, a reflection of the audience they're trying to please. That's why they struggle to be alone. Alone means invisible. Invisible means forgotten. Forgotten means worthless. So they'll do anything to avoid that. Dress louder, speak faster, cry harder, not out of deception, but out of fear. Fear that if they stop moving, stop pleasing, stop shining, they'll disappear completely. And that fear is never just about now. It's about then. It's about the parent who only noticed them when they were upset, the partner who only stayed when they played a role, the friends who disappeared the moment they weren't entertaining anymore. So they cling, not just to people, but to attention, because attention feels like proof. Proof they still exist, proof they still matter, proof they're still lovable. But it's a trap, because it never lasts. And the moment it fades, the panic returns, and the search starts all over again. This is why HPD often coexists with other disorders. Depression, anxiety, substance use, even eating disorders. Anything to fill the void. Because at its core, HPD isn't just about behavior. It's about loss. The loss of authentic self. The loss of stable identity. The loss of trust in being loved without effort. And the hardest part? Most people don't see it. They see the glitter, the volume, the spotlight. They don't see the girl crying in silence when the show ends. They don't see the man who doesn't know how to be soft without fearing rejection. They don't see the person who confuses being wanted with being loved. And even if they do, they don't know what to do. Because people with HPD can be exhausting. They demand a lot. They feel everything. They take up space, not because they want to dominate it, but because they're afraid if they don't, no one will offer it. And they often pick people who reinforce the pattern. Emotionally unavailable partners, narcissists, abusers, because chaos is familiar. Intensity feels like love, even when it hurts. But that cycle can be broken. Not easily, not quickly, but it can. Because underneath all the emotional storms is a very quiet truth. They're tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of performing. Tired of chasing affection like it's oxygen. They just don't know how to stop. Because no one ever told them they could. That they were enough, even without applause. That they were lovable, even when quiet. That they were real, even when not center stage. So they keep performing. And everyone thinks they're fine. But inside, they're still waiting for someone to say, "You can sit down now. You can rest. You don't have to perform for me to love you." This is the emotional engine behind histrionic personality disorder. Not vanity, not ego, not manipulation. Fear. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being unloved. Fear that if the spotlight goes dark, they'll disappear completely. This is BrainTrap TV. And next, we explore what it means to heal, to step off the stage, not into silence, but into something even more terrifying. Realness. They want help. That's the part people don't see. They want to be understood, to be loved, to be held without needing to earn it. But when someone with histrionic personality disorder walks into therapy, the act often comes with them. They tell stories. They charm. They laugh in all the right places. They nod along. They agree. They promise change. But when the session ends, they're still performing. Not because they want to lie, but because it's all they know. Real vulnerability feels like exposure, and exposure feels like danger. So even when they say, "I want to get better," what they're really saying is, "I want to feel safe enough to stop pretending." But that safety is rare. Therapy asks them to do something they've avoided their entire lives. Be still. Be honest. Be quiet enough to feel what's underneath the noise. And that's terrifying, because underneath all that noise is a person who never learned how to be real without getting hurt. So they resist. They deflect. They change the subject. They turn sessions into performances. They make the therapist laugh, or cry, or feel anything that distracts from the truth. Because the truth is messy. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't fit into a perfect story. It just hurts. And many can't face that alone. That's why healing from HPD is a long road. It's not about removing the behavior. It's about finding what it was covering. The tears weren't fake. The feelings weren't lies. They were real. They were just too much, too fast, too loud. And therapy becomes a place to slow down, to say something and then sit with it, to feel something without acting it out, to cry without needing an audience. And that kind of healing isn't glamorous. It's quiet, lonely, uncomfortable. There are no quick fixes, no neat endings, no big aha moment that changes everything. Just small choices. Learning to pause before reacting. Learning that silence doesn't mean rejection. Learning that love doesn't always look like attention. And slowly, the mask starts to slip. And underneath, there's a person who isn't broken, just neglected. By others, by life, by their own expectations. They start noticing patterns. I only feel alive when I'm being watched. I panic when people stop texting me back. I flirt when I feel insecure, even if I don't mean it. I create drama to test if people care. And those realizations? They sting, but they also free. Because once you can name the cycle, you can break it. It doesn't mean they stop craving attention, but they start asking deeper questions. Why do I need it so badly? What am I really afraid of? What would it feel like to be loved, even if I stopped trying so hard? And that question, more than anything else, is where healing begins. Because the opposite of histrionic isn't silence. It's authenticity. It's knowing who you are, even when no one is watching. And for someone who's built their entire life on the reactions of others, that's the bravest thing they'll ever do. So no, HPD doesn't disappear overnight. And yes, it will take time. But progress is real, and it often looks like the quietest victories. Sitting in discomfort instead of exploding. Letting a friend speak without turning the spotlight back. Admitting, I don't know how to be myself unless I'm performing. That's the work, and it matters. Because the people who live with HPD, they're not lost causes. They're not attention seekers. They're just people who didn't get what they needed early on and learned how to survive anyway. And now, they're learning something new. That survival doesn't have to mean performance. That they can be loved, not for how they make others feel, but for who they are, even if that person is still figuring it out. This is BrainTrap TV. And next, we end the story, not with a cure, but with a choice. Somewhere between craving love and becoming the person others needed. You lost yourself. And the hardest part? You were so good at playing the part, no one ever noticed. Not even you. But here's the truth. Under all the laughter, the charm, the stories, you were always just trying to feel real. That's what people don't understand about histrionic personality disorder. It's not about being loud. It's about not knowing who you are when the room goes quiet. It's about reaching for attention not out of ego, but because attention was the only time love felt safe. You weren't born this way. You were shaped this way, by environments that rewarded performance and punished vulnerability, by people who disappeared unless you dazzled them, by moments that taught you emotions are only valid if they're dramatic. And so you performed, again and again, until even you forgot where the act ended and the truth began. But the truth? It was never gone. It was just buried, beneath the panic, the spirals, the heartbreaks, the constant need for someone to look at you, feel you, want you. You were still there, still waiting to be chosen, by yourself. Because here's the thing, you can be emotional and still be stable. You can be expressive without being performative. You can be loved without begging for it. But that starts with one terrifying step, taking off the mask. Not all at once, not for everyone, just enough to feel air on your skin again. Enough to ask, who am I when no one's watching? Who am I when I don't need to be the most liked, the funniest, the loudest? Who am I when I stop auditioning for love and just receive it? And yes, that step might cost you some attention. It might cost you the relationships that only loved your mask, but it will give you something bigger. Yourself. Fully. Quietly. Honestly. Because at the end of all this, that's what histrionic personality disorder was trying to protect. A fragile self that never got to be enough. But now, you get to decide what happens next. You can keep performing, or you can start living. Not for applause, not for attention, but for you. This is BrainTrap TV, and you were never too much. You were just trying too hard to be enough. Now be. That's all you ever needed.